Hello, everybody. I'm Craig Wolfley.
And I'm Tunch Ilkin.
And, of course, we are here for the J&D Waterproofing and Home Improvements wrap-up on the postseason of the Steelers from the 2018 season. Of course, we've just put a bow on what was to be a promising season, Chaluch, but it started off in Cleveland, and things didn't exactly kick off with the greatest sort of,
Wolf, it
promise.
Started with the Lev Bell issue, and this was a season that everyone was calling for Super Bowl. And the fact that you don't even make the playoffs leaves you wanting. And there's nothing worse than not making the playoffs. There's a pit in your stomach. To quote Billy Crystal in Running Scared, it's like deceleration trauma.
True.
And so one of the things that you got to, the Lev Bell was a big concern. And then there was all this drama throughout the course of the season that ends with AB blowing off his teammates for the final game of the year against Cincinnati. And now Mike Tomlin's got to deal with that drama. The offseason is going to be interesting. But, one of the things that you look back on this year, you look at the Cleveland tie,
right.
And that comes back to haunt you. You look at the loss to the Oakland Raiders in Oakland, a team that you should have beat.
Right.
That haunts you. The collapse in the second half to the LA Chargers, that haunts you. Losing in Denver to the Broncos in a game you shouldn't have lost.
Well,
so all those things are, made you fall short of when you think about it, the only game that you really lost that you were outplayed was the Ravens at home.
Well, no question about it. The thing that you look, to me, in my mind, the first month kicked off with a very muddled 1-2-1 record.
Right.
Then you go on a 6-game winning streak. Then you go on a 3-game losing streak, encompassing all those things that you were talking about. Now, along the way, we saw the rise and fall of a lot of things. Number one was, again, you talked about the Lev Bell issue. Was he or was he not coming? That took care of itself when he didn't report at all. But we saw the rise of James Conner and coming along and post 4 100-yard games in a row. And then all of a sudden, of course, you get the ankle injury. Then we saw the rise of Jalen Samuels as being a guy with a promising possibility of being a featured back someday. He looked very, very comfortable in that role. So those are some positives we saw. Defensively, we saw Joe Hayden have a great year.
Right.
We saw Cam Hayward have another great year. We saw T.J. Watt with another step up to superstardom with a 13-sack season. So there's a number of things that we saw, along the way with players. Juju having an even better year than he had last year, and so there's a lot of promises that you can see from this team that you look forward to, but it really is taking a hit when you think about that last game. You beat Cincinnati Bengals, but you struggled mightily to overcome them. But the fun of sitting there in Heinz Field watching the big board, that was kind of like a rock concert.
Watching
just
Baltimore
hanging out. You're just watching him going. Baker Mayfield, he woke up feeling dangerous, I suppose.
Not that dangerous.
Well, he was dangerous to his own team.
Yeah.
With throwing 3 interceptions that day. But certainly it was a crestfallen team that left Heinz Field knowing that they could have been in the playoffs and they weren't. But the fact of the matter is, this whole thing with AB is really kind of cast a shadow and a pall on the season.
And now Mike Tomlin, who is looks like as he said in his post-season press conference, we're going to have to deal with this.
Right.
I'm going to address this with AB, and he wouldn't get into specifics, which I understand. But it's going to be an interesting offseason. Will there be any changes? Will there be any changes on the coaching staff? Will AB be back? And if Mike Tomlin, has probably got to sit him down with a meeting and say, all right, AB, are you all in or you're not? And if you're not all in, we'll trade you. And then, you put him out, and let's face it, hopefully you could get a first-round draft pick for him. I mean, if you could get a first-round draft pick for Amani Cooper,
that would be huge.
That's what you got to do. So now you have 2 first-round picks coming into this season. And you know what? We did see, everyone's saying, oh, you don't need AB, you got Juju. Well, we saw Juju without AB. And not to take anything away from Juju, but AB garners a lot of attention. And when he garners a lot of attention, the rest of the guys garner less attention.
Right.
And so, we're going to see what happens. I mean, that's what is going to make this offseason more drama.
I think what's scary is you look at the fact you talk about a great player as Le'Veon Bell, and you thought, well, what are you going to do with him? And you're not able to bring him back in. The thought of losing Bell and Brown in the same year is a tough one. That's a hit, and philosophically, it's like you talked about. Mike Tomlin appears to be doing a deep dive and decide, we got to change the way things are conducted around here. And so that brings me to kind of something that Tunch and I both experienced, which was the Purge of '84.
Right.
The Purge of '84 was the hardest training camp I have ever been to in my life, the hardest one I've ever heard of, and it was certainly something that, when you look back at it, including the Franco Who statement there and so forth, that was just a brutal year. Matter of fact, the theme of that training camp was, we used to say, what's the worst they can do to you? It wasn't they can, trade you or something like that. It was they can keep you.
Right.
That's
the
how
old
hard it was.
The old saying before that was, what's the worst they could do? They can cut you.
Yes.
That year, they could keep you was the worst thing they could do, because the practices were agonizing. Steve Corsa got traded. Ricky Donnell got traded. There was Franco Who. A lot of the veterans, a couple other veterans got released. And
it was just no fun.
It was the hardest
Coach
training
Noll was
camp.
an angry man.
He was an angry man, and he was
he was not fooling around.
Yeah, and you know what? If Coach Tomlin, maybe you got to go through some of that. Make training camp so hard, and just crack the whip like you did your first 2 years as the Steelers head coach.
That makes sense now. I just realized, because in '84 we went and saw Stripes, and we watched it like a dozen times, because that was the only air conditioning. We didn't have it in our
dorm room
up at training camp. So we'd go to the movies, and we'd just sit there. So we ended up watching Stripes like a dozen times. But I'll never forget, we were jogging across the field to the lower bowl up at St. Vincent College. And as we were jogging along, Coach Noll came up, and you and I were side by side, and we're jogging along. He says, I want you two to know that you two are last. And I turned to him without even thinking about it, having watched Stripes over a number of times. I turned to him and said, I'm pacing myself, Sergeant. And he looked at me like I had two heads, maybe three heads. And then he just jogged off. And that's when you turned and said, he didn't see Stripes.
He didn't see Stripes.
But the bigger thing was, he just wasn't a happy guy.
No, he was not happy. And that's the way Mike Tomlin is. He's not a happy guy. You could tell by his postseason press conference yesterday. And this is a year that nobody's happy. People are angry. Fans are angry. The one good thing about having this kind of taste in your mouth, it's like the pistachio nut theory.
Right.
When you have a bad pistachio nut, your beverage cannot eliminate that taste. Only a good pistachio nut can. So the Steelers need a good pistachio nut, so they're going to come into camp, or they're going to come into the offseason hungry. And one of the things, the mantra's got to be, we cannot let what happened last year happen again.
No question about it. I would also say this: if you get a pistachio nut caught in your teeth, it's terrible, because it's really bad and it's really hard to get out.
So we just want to thank JD Waterproofing and Home Improvement, and that's a family-run business servicing Pittsburgh and the tri-state area. Call 1-800-VERY-DRY and tell them what?
Tunch and Wolf sent you. Thank you, J&D Waterproofing.
Yes, thank you.
You folks, you're great.